from HRM planning staff. Then there will be comments and questions from the public. Planning staff will respond to questions at the very end of the session. And so if Sean is ready, he can begin his presentation now, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone. Committee members, the public, thank you, Andrea, for bringing that up. So as noted, this is the public information meeting for case 22267, which is focused on a study area near Dartmouth Road and Wardor Street. Next slide, please. So I wanted to start off by pointing out that this is a study area, and this approach was given by Regional Council to planning staff in November of 2019, when they directed us to look at policy and zoning to allow apartment buildings and townhouses in this study area. So the study area contains multiple properties, and there are 2 proposals for new development, and we will get to those later in the meeting. And the process will look at changing the Bedford Municipal Planning Strategy, which I will often refer to as the Land Use Policy, and the Bedford Land Use Bylaw, which I will often refer to as the Zoning Bylaw. And just to note that study area is where changes are being considered. We're not at this time considering changes outside the study area. And also, just because a property is outside the study area, it doesn't mean that we're not considering any potential impacts that changes might have. So we're looking at more than the study area, but we're only considering changes within the study area. Next slide, please. So a quick trip through the study area with some pictures for those of the committee or the public that may not be as familiar with the study area. So this is looking outbound on Dartmouth Road. So at your back would be Sunnyside Mall and of course the Chicken Burger. The street on your right is Wardor Street. The street on your left would be North Street. And so this is heading outbound towards Magazine Hill. And you can see in the distance at the edge of our study area, within it would be the Parker's Brook building. And we have some single unit housing. Next slide, please. So from the same location, if we looked left across the street, we would see still in our study area, a commercial building, some offices on the left, and the Masonic Lodge. Next slide, please. A little farther up the street, we're now next to the Wardor Center, still on Dartmouth Road, and you can see Parker's Brook in the distance. And to the left, the group of trees gives you a sense that we have some larger lots here, and most of those lots are single unit houses. Next slide, please. This is the Wardor Center, which is a major property in the area, and it contains the Bedford Library and offices. And behind this building is a second similar building with a parking lot in the middle, and both of them are primarily office space. And this is again Wardor Street that we're looking at. So this is the corner of Wardor and Dartmouth Road. Next slide, please. We zoomed in on the parking lot beside and behind the Wardor Street. And I noted that there's 2 proposals for new buildings within this study area. Excuse me. And one of those buildings is proposed on this back parking lot. And so this is also within our study area. And you're looking at this from the sidewalk on Wardor Street. Next slide, please. And then across the street from that location, some more of the single unit dwellings that are in the study area. And you can see the sign on the tree that's letting you know that this particular single unit property is part of one of the development proposals. So that's a quick review of the study area. There is a mix of building types. There's some vacant lots, and there is a parking lot or 2 in there as well, and a number of single unit dwellings. Next slide, please. So again, just an overview of the study area. We have the hatches are the entire study area. And where we've had red is showing you where those proposals are. One at the corner of Dartmouth Road and Wardor Street, and one on Wardor Street behind the Wardor Center, and both proposals currently are for multi-unit buildings. Next slide, please. I want to just briefly talk about some of the roles, some of the people involved within this planning process, those who will both make decisions and who will provide feedback and recommendations. So Regional Council is the decision maker. That's very important. They've directed staff to do this planning process near Dartmouth Road, and ultimately they will decide if we should change the land use policy to allow apartments or townhouses as a study area, and if so, how. The developers are the property owners who have proposed multi-unit buildings in the study area, and they made a request some time ago to Regional Council to consider new land use policy in this area. Residents, generally people living in the Fort Sackville neighborhood and beyond throughout Bedford, Eaglewood especially, they're property owners, they're renters, they're residents who have a stake in the neighborhood and are interested in how it develops, and they provide feedback through meetings like this and through talking to planning staff. Planning staff, myself, we have several jobs in this process, but I'm going to highlight a few. We organize public engagement alongside the clerk's office. We receive public feedback, and we provide Regional Council with options for land use policy and recommendations. And also, once Regional Council makes a decision, we execute that. We are the people writing new policy, making it happen, the kind of nuts and bolts of the planning process. Next slide. Oh, finally, Northwest Planning Advisory Committee. You've met them already through the chair, and their job is to provide advice to the Northwest Community Council and Regional Council, and also to planning staff. We want to know what they have to say as well. Next slide, please. A very important thing to note for this meeting and the other public information meetings that we're holding, no decisions are made at any of these meetings. The major purpose is to let residents give their views and to ask questions. And of course, since they're hosted by the Planning Advisory Committee, the Planning Advisory Committee is here listening and gets your feedback directly. So no decisions made tonight. This is for information purposes only. Next slide, please. To date, this is the planning process that staff has been working on with council's direction. So I mentioned that the developers requested to change the land use policy. So that is received by staff. Staff sent a report to Regional Council in November 2019, and staff suggested a study area approach to consider changes. And Regional Council agreed and initiated, simpler words, they started this process in November 2019. We had a public information meeting, which was planned for March 2020. It was canceled due to the COVID-19 pandemic. In lieu of meeting in person at the time, we directed a public survey to residents in the Fort Sackville neighborhood, and we received over 100 back, and that was in November 2020. We'll speak to that a little bit later. Finally, after some time working out the details, council provided direction to staff to host online meetings for these types of planning processes. And since then, we've been working to schedule and advertise those meetings. And one of the reasons there's been a little bit of time elapsed is we had a backlog of different meetings to clear. This isn't the only planning process going. So there has been a little bit of time elapsed. And I want to point that out because people have sometimes asked, well, there's so much time elapsed, has some decision been made? No, that's not the case. Unfortunately, COVID has changed this planning process a fair bit. Next slide, please. As well, I want to highlight the planning documents that will be guiding staff and council through this process, some of which are local in nature and some of which are more regional in nature. The first is the Bedford Municipal Planning Strategy. It's commonly, more simple name, I guess, would be the Land Use Policy. You might also hear it referred to as the Secondary Municipal Planning Strategy, or MPS. Planners have a lot of different words for the same thing, it seems. Anyways, what that does is it provides high-level direction about how Bedford should develop. It provides the goals, and it's specific to the former town of Bedford, but Regional Council is now the decision maker in charge of that document. Also local to Bedford is the Land Use Bylaw, more commonly known as the Zoning Bylaw, and it provides specific rules for what can be built on each site. And that's done by zoning different properties for different uses, for example, residential or commercial. And the zoning bylaw also specifies things like what types of buildings are allowed, for example, single unit or 2-unit townhouses, etc., how big those buildings can be, where they can be on the property, how far they must be from lots and the street, from property lines, and finally, how much parking must be provided. So it's a fairly technical document, but it has a big effect on what gets built throughout Bedford. At the more regional level, we have the Hrm Regional Plan, which applies to the entire municipality. And it provides high-level direction on where and how growth, generally meaning new housing units, new jobs, new buildings, where that growth should happen in the municipality. And a focus of the regional plan is to direct new housing to places that have existing services. And by that, we mean existing water and sewer pipes. And an important focus of the regional plan is also to provide enough housing. So it's a very important document, and it's very important right now, especially because Halifax is one of the fastest growing municipalities in all of Canada, and there is quite high demand for housing. The Integrated Mobility Plan, the final one to talk about, it provides a high-level direction for how transportation and land use planning should happen. And similar to the regional plan, a goal is to put people where there's existing options for traveling by bike, by walking, and by transit. And an overall goal is to reduce the amount of driving that people do. And just a note, the site for this, case 22267, we updated it today, and there's links to these 4 planning documents on the application page. So I'll tell you a little bit more about those details, but you can find them more easily. People have been asking for them, so the planning page specific to this website now has those. Next slide, please. So we're back to looking at the specific land use policy within this study area. And this is again under the Municipal Planning Strategy for Bedford, the Land Use Policy, or the MPS. There are a couple of main designations. The designations tell you broadly what you can do. Excuse me. So the R is for residential, the C is for commercial, the I is for institutional, and the P is for parkland. So the main zones are residential and commercial in this area, although just outside the study area, there is institutional and park, generally on the school, the cemeteries, properties like that. So within the municipal planning strategy, the zoning for each property corresponds with the designation. So there's a residential zone alongside a residential designation. Unique to Bedford, any zoning change that allows more units requires a change to the land use policy and not just the zoning. So specifically, if you want to do residential multi-unit and you have a residential single unit zone, you can't just change the land use bylaw, you have to change the policy. So that is one of the reasons that we're here tonight. This is a policy exercise. And the land use policy, among a host of other important goals, does provide this for the residential designation, these goals: to permit residential development to occur in areas where the municipality can economically provide services, to provide for a choice of housing types, to preserve the character of existing neighborhoods in their present form, permit the full range of residential uses, and promote neighborhood stability within established residential areas. So that's a high-level goal, and one of the jobs of council and planning staff when considering these potential changes is to try to balance the different goals within that policy and within the regional plan level policy, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So next slide, please. So the study area zoning, the land use bylaw, is more specific and is at the site level generally. So the major zones in this area are residential single unit, residential townhouse, general business district, institutional, and park. And if you look at the map, just at the top of the page, which would be north of the rail line, you'll see some different commercial zones around Sunnyside Mall and the Bedford Highway. And an important thing to note is that zoning allows certain types of development to happen, but it doesn't force it to happen. So for example, if a property is rezoned, it does not have to be used immediately or at all for the new use, especially for residential zones and for residential single units, you can continue your use. You're not forced into changing. Next slide, please. This is a look at the regional plan, a really quick look at the regional plan and some of the growth centers in the Bedford area. And the growth centers are where the regional plan directs that council consider adding new housing and new jobs to keep up with our growth. And there's two main types of growth centers. The first would be such as Bedford West, which you can see on the far left bottom of the screen. And Bedford West is what would be a new growth center. So in my lifetime, that was mostly forest at one time. And now a developer has taken that and they've added roads, they've added lots, they've added buildings and all the services that go with them. So that's a new development, a new growth center. If you want to get technical, we would call it greenfield development. Another type of growth center would be one where there's already a built-up area. So Sunnyside Mall, this area, including parts of the Fort Sackville neighborhood and Sunnyside Mall, and also Mill Cove. That would be an example of growth centers where the idea is to add new units, new housing into already developed areas. That could be by building on vacant lots. That could be by building on parking lots. That could be by allowing larger buildings than exist there now. There's many ways to do it, but that is one of the broad goals of the regional plan, is to place some of the growth within these existing growth centers. Next slide, please. So we're going to go back to the study area again. Going to be talking about that a fair bit tonight, of course. So just to point out again that Regional Council directed staff to begin this planning process. It was in response to two separate requests to allow multi-unit buildings. And Regional Council directed planning staff to consider new policy for the study area. So a new set of goals and a new set of rules to be considered. And the requests for those multi-units would be reviewed through the larger study area process. And Regional Council told staff that we could consider the following building types. So low to mid-rise buildings, multi-unit residential, such as townhouses and multi-unit buildings, apartment or condo style, and a mix of uses, including both residential and commercial in the same building. Regional Council also gave conditions for new land use policy, and that land use policy must allow development, could only allow development that provides acceptable transitions to nearby properties. That means that where you have smaller buildings, it has to be a reasonable size and a reasonable distance away from those buildings. Is pedestrian transit and pedestrian supportive and transit oriented. And simply that means you can easily get out onto the sidewalk from your door and walk somewhere, especially to a bus, and is context sensitive. So staff's role is to recommend an approach based on council's direction and we attempt to balance a number of different things and a number of different viewpoints, including public feedback, feedback from the Northwest Planning Advisory Committee, council direction, and direction from policies like the Regional Plan and Integrated Mobility Plan. And again, council will make the final decision using our recommendations and the feedback provided by the committees and the public. Next slide, please. So, as noted, we do have two specific proposals within this study area. The first is fronting on Dartmouth Road and Wardor Street, and this is the Stevens Group proposal. And it is for a 4-story multi-unit building. Just going to find the details here, just give me a second. 48 residential units, main driveways, and underground parking, and some surface parking. And I want to point out that these are concepts. These are what a building of this size and this type could look like on the site. They are not approved and they are not fully designed. So next slide, please. This is a view of the site plan as proposed, showing the larger portion of the building with some townhouse style units, again at the corner of Dartmouth Road and Wardor Street. Next slide, please. This is the proposal behind the Wardor Center on the Wardor Center parking lot. And so this would be looking from Dartmouth Road. Excuse me, that's not correct. This would be looking from Wardor Street. Dartmouth Road would be on the left side of the screen. And you're looking at the building and you can see it from Wardor Street. Next slide, please. This is a proposed site plan. You can see that the building would be behind the main upper parking lot of the Wardor Center. And if you will, it's closing off the U with the two other buildings with one access off of Wardor Street. Next slide, please. And this is the view from Dartmouth Road or the parking lot of the Wardor Center, showing that there is some proposed commercial uses on the ground floor of that building. Next slide, please. And once again, we've seen this slide before, but this is where those two proposals sit within the broader study area that we're looking at. Next slide, please. So the surveys. We had a mail out of 267 surveys. We had 103 responses. We've had a fair number of web page views, 254 in the month of April alone, when not a huge amount was happening on this proposal. That's pretty high. All of which is showing, not surprising to the residents, that there's a lot of interest in this proposal, in this, this planning work. So I'm only going to give a high-level overview of the survey. And most respondents to the survey strongly oppose new zoning, and especially for apartment or condominium buildings. And I would say that the numbers are about 3/4 or so opposed to the building. Many respondents see this as being larger than just these sites on Dartmouth Road and Wardor Street. They cite the importance to Fort Sackville Road and also the potential for the slippery slope of zoning changes throughout the neighborhood, or the thin edge of the wedge, whichever metaphor you'd like to use. And they also feel that single unit zoning that currently exists in much of the study area and most of the neighborhood is a long-term expectation and promise from the municipality. And most residents that responded do not see benefits for them or their neighborhood for these types of proposals. More specific concerns, we heard almost unanimously, well over 90%, concerns about traffic, congestion, and in particular, cutting through Fort Sackville neighborhood and trying to make turns onto a busy high-speed road at Dartmouth Road. specific concerns about the loss of neighborhood character in the Fort Sackville area, and increasing the population with the right infrastructure. People felt that was not the right approach. And I will say that a small number of residents were in favor of apartments or townhouses, and they generally cited the demand for housing and the benefits to local businesses. Next slide, please. So we've reviewed these surveys. Many of them, unfortunately not all, are up on the website. We're working to fix that. And after looking through them, some higher level questions that myself as the planner have for residents and also the Planning Advisory Committee to think about. And these are, how does the existing mix of buildings impact the character of Dartmouth Road? And how do the existing mix of buildings impact the overall neighborhood, the Fort Sackville neighborhood? And one of the key questions, perhaps the key question, is how does council best balance the needs and desires of this neighborhood with the high demand for housing in HRM? So I'm going to leave you those to think about. I'd appreciate any of your thoughts, and especially for the PAC, this is really critical stuff that I hope we get a chance to talk about when the committee meets to discuss it among themselves. Next slide, please. I'd like to, at a high level, talk about some potential approaches that we feel might be a possibility for this site, things that we could consider as we move along through the process. And the first would be to provide new policy, new land use policy and zoning to allow multi-unit buildings in specific locations. The second would be new policy to allow townhouses or stacked townhouses, again, in specific locations in the study area. A third possibility, which is the possibility with all policy exercises, is to make no changes. That is an option that council can take. They can make a choice to not change the land use policy or the zoning. And finally, council could mix and match these options. For instance, different zones on different lots. The whole study area does not need one broad brush. It's not multi-units everywhere or no multi-units, townhouses everywhere or no no townhouses. We can mix and match on different lots in different areas within the study area. Next slide, please. Just wanted to show a quick idea. Townhouses, kind of a graphic, very simple, but on top, where you have individual units, often owned by individual owners, and they're side by side attached horizontally. Stacked townhouses are that idea, but you have stacked another row of units on top. So you do get more units. You generally get a little bit more height, but if the next slide comes along, please, I can show you that. This is a stacked townhouse in the HRM, relatively new. And so you can see it's a 3-story building, but it's got a relatively high-pitched roof. And you can see there's multiple doors per section. So you have multiple units along each of those vertical divisions. So that would be one potential option for some of the study area. Next slide, please. So again, another graphic design masterpiece from yours truly. We could, and this is just trying to show the idea, we could mix and match different types of zoning for different lots and different parts of the study area. If there are parts where council feels that it's more appropriate for some higher density, again, within the bounds of the study area conditions, we could put that only on some lots and then use lower density or no changes on other lots. So again, it's not a one-size-fits-all zone for the entire study area. Next slide, please. So the next steps that we have in this process, we're still not very far in. I know it feels like a long time. Again, that's the COVID delay. I understand that that's frustrating. The next thing that we're going to do after this meeting is the Northwest Planning Advisory Committee themselves will meet. Staff will make a presentation and they will discuss, ask questions, and they will make recommendations. And they go directly to the Northwest Community Council, but staff pay attention to these recommendations as well. We want to hear from Northwest Planning Advisory Committee. After that, there is a further staff review and a staff report, and that will contain a recommendation. So at some point, staff puts their cards on the table for council to consider. The staff report goes to Northwest Community Council. They review, they discuss, they ask questions of staff, and they make a recommendation. They could, if they so choose, ask staff for more information and in a supplementary report, or they could ask for changes to what's going forward. Similarly, regional council, they're the decision maker. They can ask or tell staff to make any changes they feel are appropriate. And at some point, to make a decision, they have to hold a public hearing. Next slide, please. So all of that is perhaps a long-winded way to say that there are more opportunities to provide feedback. You can provide written comments for Northwest Planning Advisory Committee. You comments for the community. You can provide written comments and speak at the public hearing, which is in front of Regional Council. And as always, you can email or phone planning staff for comments or questions. And I would suggest a useful resources in your office to try to send feedback and you're not sure where to go. Always try clerks. They're friendly, they're helpful. clerks@halifax.ca. You can also email myself. That works as well. Next slide, please.
Sean, you're freezing a little bit here.
I think it's my last slide. So, second last. Final thing to note, just so this is clear, no decisions are made tonight, and no decision can be made until after a public hearing. And the people who hold the public hearing, that's Regional Council. They are the final decision makers. Next slide, please. Let's see if this one's my last one. There we go. Okay. Thank you so much. If this is a lot to take in, I understand. So again, if you need to contact me, my information is there. I would suggest email. That's the preferred way, but happy to talk with people as well. As always, correspondence to committees or councils. And finally, the website, halifax.ca/planning. You can scroll down. There's a lot of different cases to case 22267. And the latest update, we put some of those planning documents on there. And if you're on the case website, it's under process and there's links right through to the documents. So if you'd like to take a closer look, have a look at the policy, the regional plan, absolutely do that. And I hope that helps you out as well. So once again, thank you so much to the committee. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll be back in a little bit.
Thank you very much, Sean. And now we come to the public participation section where we'll be hearing from you people who've been so kindly waiting and listening. But before we do that, I have a few reminders. Just before you're invited to share questions and comments that they have about case 22267 Dartmouth Road and Wardour Street, Bedford, the legislative assistant will call 3 speakers' names at a time to help you prepare for speaking. If you're using a phone, keep your phone muted until you hear your name. Make sure that your webcast is muted. Then press *6. You'll hear an announcement say that you're no longer muted. Don't speak yet. When I call your name, you may unmute your mic and begin speaking. You will have up to 4 minutes to speak. Each speaker is asked to begin by stating your name and the name of the community in which you reside for the record. Keep your comments respectful, on topic, and directed to the chair. Once you've finished your comments, please hang up your phone or leave the Zoom meeting and watch the rest of the meeting using the webcast. The link is available at the halifax.ca agenda page for this meeting. Due to the number of speakers registered for this evening's meeting, I will ask the planner to make a note of all questions asked by speakers so that the planner can answer all questions after the last registered speaker finishes their comments. If a question requires further research, the planner will reply to the registered speakers via email when they are able to after the meeting. Participants who go beyond the allotted time or do not respect the rules will be asked to mute themselves or to leave the meeting. If, as a result of the comments made during this meeting, you have additional questions or comments, participants are invited to contact the planner, Sean Gillis. I'm now going to ask the legislative assistant to call upon the first group of 3 registered participants.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our first group of 3 speakers is Margaret Embray, Jean Bird, and Brent Newsom.
Okay, and it's Margaret. Oh, yes, there she is. Hello, Margaret. Welcome. And you have 4 minutes. You can begin now, please.
Thank you so much. Good evening, and my name is Margaret Embry, and I live at 25 Dartmouth Road in Bedford. This is a large 4-floor building with 48 apartments, 16 on each floor. There are 2 more apartment buildings suggested for this area. One will be on the corner of Dartmouth Road and Wardor. It is suggested that there be an additional 48 units in this building. This would mean at least 50 more cars and 100 more people. The next building is suggested for Wardor Street. This building is to be 5-story with 51 units, meaning another 100 people and possibly 50 plus cars. That means adding 200 plus people and 100 cars to a residential area. What is the suggested rent for these buildings? Affordable housing is urgently needed, and are these scheduled to be low rent? It should be noted that the Dartmouth Road is extremely busy at rush hours, with workers heading for the bridge or Dartmouth or points beyond. At rush hours, traffic has a tendency to slip onto the side streets to access Shore Drive and the lights at Hatchery Lane. Where are the exits and entrances for these 2 buildings? I would note that if the driveway for the building on Wardor is to be the Dartmouth Road, there could be a sight problem with the railway bridge and cars coming not only from the change of lights, but the ramp by the Chicken Burger. There is a school in the area. Have plans been made to increase the occupancy of the school? If so, is there enough area to do that? It should be noted that there was a school on one of these lots at one time. Have arrangements been made to obtain more land for a sidewalk for children to get safely to school? The historical significance of the area should also be noted. Fort Sackville was built on or about 1700 to protect Halifax. Some remnants of the fort are still visible. The Manor House, one of the oldest homes in Bedford, was built in 1749 and has been maintained in various forms since that time. It is presently owned by Halifax Regional Municipality and is designated as historic property. The house is maintained by the Fort Sackville Foundation. Parking for various events can be a problem, and it would create a problem if there were a lot more cars in the area or trying to drive by on narrow streets. It would be preferred to maintain the historic significance of the area. Walking on the grounds of the Manor House is very popular, and unfortunately, a lot of dog owners do not realize what the garbage cans are for, and a lot more people living in the area would bring more walkers and more dogs. Some other questions that I have. 1, would either of these buildings create wind tunnels and cut off sunshine to residents' gardens and yards? 2, how many traffic lights would have to be installed? At the moment, there is a crossing light at the corner of Dartmouth Road and Wardor. I have known people to get out of their cars, push the red light so they can have access to the Dartmouth Road exit. Are the water and sewer lines adequate to handle all this extra population? 4, what would the limits for construction noise be? And 5, what would happen to the wildlife who seem to enjoy the area? From my window, I can see birds, squirrels, and deer.
Margaret, you're at 30 seconds.
Thank you very much. I'm done.
Thank you very much. Okay, but next speaker, please.
The next speaker is Jean Bird, and Jean is being prompted to unmute her phone now. She's on the phone.
Yes, okay, I see her.
Jean.
Hello.
Yeah, there
Hi.
she is. Hello, Jean.
Hi.
Welcome.
All right.
and
Hello.
You have 4 minutes to speak, and please start
Thank
now.
you. I will do my best to get it in there. My
Thank
name
you.
is Jean Bird, and I live at 2 Fort Sackville Road. I came to Bedford 66 years ago as a young bride, and over the years I have witnessed many changes and many growing pains, but this one is more like a major cramp. Some of my concerns about the proposed development I expressed in my response to the survey. A prime concern, but by no means the only one, is traffic. The traffic at the intersection of Wardor and North Streets on the Dartmouth Road is severely congested, as is the Dartmouth Road. And any additional traffic on or near the intersection and on the Dartmouth Road itself is unthinkable. My neighborhood is wedged between the Dartmouth Road and the Bedford Highway, and as such it becomes a convenient shortcut between them. More traffic we do not need. Other concerns I expressed in response to the survey were 1, increased density. What are we supposed to do with approximately 200 or more people living in this confined neighborhood? Our local recreational, health, and school facilities are already strained. Density in the old Bedford core we do not need. What is the capacity of density in this core area of Bedford before it loses its present character? Another concern, the driveways off Wardor Street to service both of these apartment buildings. That's hard to believe. This rezoning request is a sort of hybrid thing. While the commercial aspect of it along the highway is within the allowed zoning, the intrusion with the apartment buildings into the existing established neighborhood is not. What must we, the residents of Bedford, do to convince the planners that increased density in the old core of Bedford is a bad idea and is considered by myself and many others as an unwarranted assault on the community? As residents of the town, we felt confident that our homes and our neighborhoods would be protected from unwanted development. However, we were having a rude awakening that this is no longer the case. While some density developments along the highways would be a good thing, the current proposal on the Dartmouth-Wardor Street is not a good thing. Any density development in these areas must seriously consider and and respect the abutting neighborhoods. And it is becoming very evident that through the rezoning applications that this is not a prime consideration. The residents of this and other established older neighborhoods deserve much better from the powers that be that hold the future of the Bedford community in their hands. Bedford is an historic place in the neighborhood, and thanks to the Tolson family, we enjoy the site of Fort Sackville, built in the 1700s to protect the developing settlement of Halifax, and the Bedford Highway as a means to access the Minas Basin, as well as the Scott Manor House on the site, circa 1770 or thereabouts, which is now a well-used community asset. Protecting our old established neighborhoods and our history and culture were two prime objectives of the town zoning. The conservation of these have made Bedford a very real asset to Halifax, but we do not want to become simply an extension of the city core. Communities like Bedford are sought out by people moving from densely populated parts of the country and abroad. The best and the brightest seek communities like ours and significantly contribute to the entire area. For one thing, these older neighborhoods are renewed and injected with the vitality and talents they bring.
Jean, you're at 30 seconds.
Oh, thank you. A benefit to all. We should not kill the goose that lays the golden egg. I would remind you that as neighborhoods go, so goes the community. At this point, I would like to quote to you an excerpt from the Economic Growth Plan on the Social Policy adopted by the city. Quote, the complexity of social issues requires the involvement of all sectors and engagement of those most affected. End of quote. Where is Bedford in that vision? To designate the old core of Bedford as a growth area does not make any sense. I know Halifax needs housing and improved transportation, but we should not be seen as a solution to its growth problems. Old Bedford, as it exists with its single-family housing, established neighborhoods, is a very much sought-after place in which to live. Just ask the CFAs, and I feel they will agree. Just let us be. Please reject the zoning application and others that impinge in or on our old existing neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Madam Chair, the next speaker is Brent Newsom, and he has a couple of photos that he would like to share. So I'm just going to start sharing them.
Thank you.
So Brent, if you can go to the bottom left-hand corner of your screen to unmute your mic.
Thanks, Pam. Thank you, Madam Chair, and to the volunteer members of the committee. Thanks for your service to the community. My name is Brent Newsom, and I'm the owner and resident of 57 Stone Terrace, Bedford. I'm a business owner and a 25-year resident of Bedford. I had my home constructed in this location in 2006, and I've sent the clerk two pictures, which she's now displaying. The first is a view looking southwest down Stone Terrace from the intersection of Stone Terrace and Dartmouth Road. You can see my house is at the end of Stone Terrace. I include these pictures. Can we have the next slide? The second picture is the view looking from my house, and you can see the study area is to the northeast. I include these pictures because the presentation being used by Mr. Gillis does not include any pictures of Stone Terrace, nor the residential character of the neighborhood, nor of the homes in the area. You can visually see the study area encompasses 1/3 or 7 of all of the homes you see in the pictures, and I've attempted to mark out the study area with yellow lines. Most of the buildings in the area are 1.5 stories in height. I'm attending this meeting to express my objections to both development proposals, as well as any future proposal for rezoning of any of the properties in the study area. As you can see, the proposed development is not in keeping with the character of the established neighborhood, nor is a 48-unit, 4-story apartment building in keeping with policy R8 of the Bedford MPS and the Bedford Land Use Bylaw. I wish to use the rest of my time to pose several questions to staff. Mr. Gillis showed a map of the Sunnyside Mall being an urban growth district with a circle. In reading the HRM strategic plan of October 2014 and associated maps, I can find no geographic definition of the Sunnyside Mall urban growth district. Could staff please clarify the source of the map you presented and its legal definitions in law? Can staff please define what is low density and medium density residential use? For example, how many apartments per acre is medium density development? How many people per square foot is low density versus medium density? How would staff define 48 apartment units on 0.85 acres? Is that low density or medium density? If the Bedford MPS was to be amended as is being requested, could the developer be required to follow the current proposed plans, or once amended, would they be free to then change their designs to build whatever they wanted as of right? What would the zoning be, and what would be permitted in that zoning? Have the proponents in either case made representations that their developments will meet the aims of policy R18 and R19 of the Bedford MPS? Can city staff provide a rationale as to why policy R16 paragraph 11 subsection V, which governs New Bedford residential comprehensive development districts, seemingly limits the number of apartments to 35 per acre and a height of 3 stories? Why is it okay to limit the size of apartment buildings in New Bedford construction, but not in Old Bedford construction? What is the legal order of precedence for the many planning, municipal strategies, and zoning bylaws that Mr. Gillis outlined? For example, does the regional plan override the Bedford MPS and the Bedford bylaws? How are conflicts between them resolved? Why does HRM's planning staff seem to give greater weight to the objectives of the HRM strategy versus the Bedford planning bylaws? Could staff explain the planning principles behind the inconsistency of not permitting developments of this type in a new RCDD, but again, allow them in an area not governed by an RCDD. How is the flood plan, the Sackville flood plan study of 2018, does that impact how does that impact the urban growth district?
Brent, you're at 30 seconds.
As I understand it, now we are in a 1 in 20 area, or 1 in 20 year flood zone. And in fact, most buildings couldn't get insurance if they're in a flood zone. How does that impact the ability for somebody to build in this area? And is the Bedford urban growth district even possible anymore with that flood study completed? Thank you very much for your time.
Hi, Anne, you're muted.
Sorry about that, but we're ready for the next speaker now.
Yes, our next group of 3 speakers include Wendy Walsh, Marvin Burnett, and Vivek Tomar. Elizabeth Kushian has contacted our office and says that she doesn't want to speak. So we will begin with Wendy.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, my name is Wendy Walsh and I live on Perth Street in the Fort Sackville neighborhood. And I have 2 comments that I'd like to make and expand on. Number 1 is related to traffic and number 2 is compatibility. So let's begin with the first issue. 93% of survey respondents express concerns with traffic. And I don't know this for sure, but I wonder if traffic is seen as a changeable problem. Perhaps the city thinks that we can fix that with traffic calming measures, speed humps, lights, bypass. However, it is more than traffic. It is narrow streets, it's very few sidewalks, it is heavy pedestrian use, which is a great thing, and it's vehicles. Slide 1, please. Oh, sorry, that's actually slide 2. There's slide 1. So that's on Perth Street, just outside of the study area. And in this case, it's a bus, but it could equally be an oil delivery truck, garbage truck, car traffic. The streets are old, and you can see here how narrow they are. There will inevitably be cut through traffic, and this little neighborhood is not equipped to manage safely when you factor in more than just vehicle counts. The second issue I want to raise is compatibility. Other speakers have spoken to that, and I'm going to refer to 2016 HRM planning strategy. I'm not sure if that applies to Bedford, but I'm assuming that it does. It states that residential development should be encouraged to be compatible with existing neighborhoods. It goes on to say that the integrity of neighborhoods should be maintained by requiring that any new development, which would differ in use or intensity of use, be related to the characteristics of that neighborhood. You notice the document uses the word neighborhood, not street, not road. The neighborhood is not the Dartmouth Road. It is several streets, including the Dartmouth Road and around the Dartmouth Road. The planning strategy further states differences in residential areas contribute to the richness of Halifax because different neighborhoods exhibit different characteristics. The characteristics of this neighborhood are different. They are unique and they are historic. Scott Manor House is in this neighborhood. It's a provincial municipal heritage property dating back to 1770. The neighborhood contains 2 historic graveyards that hold annual graveyard walks to profile notable historic people like architect Andrew Cobb, whose work includes many King's College Chapel and main buildings. It also includes Colonel Joseph Scott, who arrived in Halifax with Edward Cornwallis and built Scott Manor. Unlike Cornwallis, he was a friend of the Mi'kmaq and he wanted to be buried with them. And slide 2 that you see here, the rock that's in the foreground is believed to be his burial site, which is in our neighborhood. My home set in that graveyard and was the first Anglican church in Bedford, opened for service in 1869. Also, this neighborhood hosts annual guided historical tours during Bedford Days. And Tony Edwards has written a book called Historic Bedford, which features the Fort Sackville neighborhood prominently. So the neighborhood is rich in history. It is not the Wardor Library and retail complex, and is not solely the Dartmouth Road. The aforementioned are our neighborhood characteristics, and the planning strategy claims that, quote, the city encourages the retention of existing residential characteristics. One of the reasons I believe there was such a robust survey response and opposition is because residents don't view these zoning changes and the intensity that comes with apartment buildings as compatible with the characteristics of the surrounding community.
Linda, you're at 30 seconds.
Yep, thank you. When the proposed developments come around onto Stone Terrace and down Wardor, it is not about the Dartmouth Road. It becomes about retaining or not retaining the unique characteristics of a unique neighborhood. This is a neighborhood that is tiny. It is surrounded on all sides by the basin, by the railroad, by the highway. It is compact, it is not expandable, and as such, it is very, very vulnerable to scale and intensity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, and our next speaker is?
Our next speaker is Marvin Burnett.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, Marvin. You have 4 minutes. Please
Thank
start
you.
now.
Thank you. So good evening, everyone. I'm Marvin Burnett and I live on Main Street. I'd like to start by just saying that unlike a lot of the speakers here, we moved into this neighborhood about 7 or 8 years ago from Winnipeg. Part of the big reason we moved here was because we fell in love.
We've lost somebody here. Andrea,
Yes, Madam Chair.
have we lost Mr. Burnett?
I think we have. So what we'll do is I'll ask our clerk's office staff to get in touch with Marvin to see what his problem is, and we'll move
Hello.
on. Oh, hi, Marvin.
There he is. Yeah, we lost you there for a minute.
Yeah, I saw the Zoom meeting circling saying rejoining, so I apologize for the internet connection.
Okay, continue then.
As I was saying, we moved here from Winnipeg about 7 or 8 years ago, back in 2014. One of the big reasons for moving to Nova Scotia was because we wanted to move, or more specifically into Bedford, was because we love the neighborhood and the heritage of Bedford. I'd like to make a couple points, more of interest and discussion, and a few comments or questions that I have as well. I would like to first start with the 2 buildings that are approximately 100 units. Given the location, it's probably reasonable to believe that there will be at least 1, maybe 2 cars in each of those units, which would increase the traffic in the area of up to 200 vehicles, or approximately 200 vehicles. It's also reasonable to believe that at times they're probably going to have company or guests join them, which could increase at a reasonable level of another 100 vehicles. So at that point, it seems like we could be increasing up to 300 vehicles of traffic into what, as everyone's already noted, a very congested area. I'd also like to point out that without adequate parking, it is once again reasonable to believe that the people that are going to be either living in these areas or parking as guests in these areas will inevitably spill over to the adjacent streets, of which many of them don't actually have sidewalks, and poses a very strong risk to families, especially ones like mine with young children or a young child. And I just want people to understand and take note that this is actually very important to myself, that taking into account the risks to the families in the areas is something that should be considered. One of the other things I do want to state is that I am 100% opposed, and my family is opposed to this proposal. Also, in terms of questions, I would also like to ask, like in the proposed area that was being shown, our property was actually, part of our property was being sliced as being rezoned into that. I'd like to know if there's natural boundaries already built where the property lines are, why is it cutting off part of our property line or being set into a rezoning area? Why wouldn't they just follow the natural the borders that were already set for the property lines? I'd also like to know what kind of impact long-term this could have on my property. So does that mean that it's my choice, or could the city at some point in time deem that this could be sold or repurposed for other use? One other point I'd also like to add, just in finishing, is that at the beginning of the slides that Mr. Gillis was showing, I noticed that primarily they were primarily they were focused on commercial properties. The zones that were highlighted, there was no pictures of all the residential units in Stone Terrace. There was no pictures of the residential homes in North Street, and there was no homes.
You're at 30 seconds.
Oh, thank you. There was no homes in the residential area of Main Street, which is all outlined in the change here. I think it was a little bit biased, showing primarily commercial, as well as the, I believe it's called the Parkersbrook residential unit there. So I'd like to see those slides updated if he plans on presenting those further to other people. Thank you very much.
Madam Chair, our next speaker is Vivek Tomar.
Hello, am I good to go?
Yes, you are.
Okay, perfect. My name is Vivek Tomar and I live at 11 Brook Street. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to both live and work in Old Bedford. The proposed Wardor development is located adjacent to my property in my backyard. We moved to this neighborhood over 11 years ago when we found out that we were having twin boys and our family was quickly growing from 3 to 5. We chose to move to this neighborhood over other neighborhoods in the city due to the character and history of the area when compared to the newer neighborhoods that are being developed now in the city. Old Bedford is a unique community in HRM with a strong sense of character and history that's worth preserving. This neighborhood is very sought after. I observed many people meeting and parking at Wardor Center to run, walk, or bike all the way through to Wolf Park through our neighborhood. In addition, I observed many children biking and learning to bike in the lower parking lot area. The proposed rezoning will have a direct impact on the use of my property. When I saw the initial concept of the Wardor development, I was shocked at the size and scale of the development. It was difficult to explain to my children that someone wants to develop a 5-story structure in our backyard. Will there still be sun? What will happen with the wind? What will it look like? Can I still play in my backyard? Why are they building this? To quote, I like our quiet street. I agree with many of the statements made during these public meetings. We do not see any positive impacts to our community from the proposed rezoning and proposed developments. There's the increase in traffic on Wardor Street, difficulty to make turns on Dartmouth Road. Current infrastructure doesn't support developments. Where will everyone park? Likely on Brook Street in front of my house. Size and scale of developments do not match the character and history of the neighborhood. The existing zoning makes sense for our community, and so on. It was noted that Sunnyside was selected as a growth zone. One of the planning questions is how to balance the need for housing in this growth area. I guess my question is, how can this be done in a fully developed area that has development restrictions due to the previously mentioned floodplains? There's a CN rail line, there's D&D lands, there's many restrictions which doesn't really make the area suitable for it. If rezoning happens, we'll just open up the Shore Drive area in our community to development creep, where other developers will start buying lots and proposing future developments deeper into the community. You know, what will happen? We'll force the school when it comes up for disposition if they don't need it anymore, or even the cemeteries. In conclusion, I'm not in support of the proposed rezoning. Overall, I think HRM could do a better job in communication, as if we found that we've had to seek out the information versus most of it forthcoming. I'm not sure if the feedback surveys were as widely distributed as I think they should be based on the scale and impact of these proposed changes. And I found that the presentation that Mr. Gillis did here was actually some of the best information I've seen to date to clearly explain what's happening. Again, I'd just like to reiterate, I'm not really in support of the rezoning, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, and we will move on to the next speaker. Thank you.
Yes, Madam Chair. So we are on to our next group of 3 speakers.
Yes.
First up is Madeline Dillon, Donald Abbott, and Krista Chen.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so our first speaker then is Madeline Dillon. And I see her down here. She is not, she's muted. Can you please unmute your microphone, Madeline?
I will refrain from speaking at this point. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, you have 4 minutes for giving your presentation. You can start now, please.
Madam Chair, I have refrained from speaking at this moment. Thank you.
Oh, okay,
So-
thank you. Okay, so then we will move on to Donald Abbott. I see a Kirby Abbott.
Okay.
I don't see a Donald. Hello, is this Donald Abbott?
It is Donald Abbott. Kirby
Okay.
Abbott is my middle name, so sorry for the confusion.
Thank you. Anyway, you are up now, and you have 4 minutes to tell us your story.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chairman. As noted, my name's Donald Abbott. I live at 31 Main Street. I oppose the rezoning and any amendments. The Bedford Municipality Planning Strategy, or MPS, is a strategic document and is a well thought out vision for Bedford, which amongst other things preserves the unique identity of Bedford's established neighborhoods. The MPS is the reason why our unique community has been preserved over the years. For those of us who like our community, the MPS provides a wonderful vision. For the Bedford Holdings applicant, the MPS has been dismissed by noting it as a, quote, relic and, quote, is outdated and therefore does not contemplate a development scenario that is proposed in the application. They assert their proposal without any supporting studies or factual evidence will, quote, have a minimal impact on the local community. Both applicants at least acknowledge that they need to work within the MPS framework. Both cite specifically MPS policy R8 as the basis to successfully acquire an amendment. The HRM planning report, which was adopted by Council on 12 November, cites some cardinal rules on considering amendment requests, such as that site-specific plans should be avoided, as it makes it difficult to maintain coherent policy direction and rarely addresses the underlying issue of outdated SPS policy. Yet having stated this, and in the absence of fact, define their own cardinal rules, and at least from my perspective, frankly, without any real application of the MPS, the report surprisingly and unpersuasively concludes, quote, staff generally agree with the applicant's rationale and advise that there is merit in reviewing SPS policy. For me, at least, this sentence comes out of the blue and has kept us on the path that we're now on today. On page 6, the report outlines the applicant's rationale, and it talks about supporting policy in MPS and specifically the key provision of policy R8. The report notes, quote, an objective of the Bedford SPS is to provide housing choice. Policy R8 envisages allowing housing forms other than single unit dwellings, end quote. With all respect, R8 says much more than that. I urge everyone to read R8. R8 states, quote, it shall be the intention of town council to promote neighborhood stability within established residential areas which are zoned for a residential use on the zoning map. Very importantly then, within R8, which expressly addresses an amendment if seeking to place an apartment unit in an RSU zone. This is exactly the situation we're in. There's specific reference to this exact situation in R8. R8 expressly limits this type of apartments to those found in MPS policies R18 and R19, which exclusively deal with creating apartments for the elderly, the physically challenged, or households with low or moderate incomes. Neither applicant proposes this type of apartment unit. Respectfully, I submit that this is fatal to their application to seek an amendment under R8. I know that others may have other views, and I hope that this can be resolved without litigation. The report then takes another leap, identifying the Masonic Hall and nearby office buildings. It recommends that these sites also be included in one study area. The developers in the community did not ask for this. If I hadn't looked at the map attached to the
Excuse me,
report,
you're at 30 seconds.
I would never have known that another residential area across from Dartmouth Road in the Wardor Center, which was never referred to in this part of the report, was slipped into the map as well. This includes my property lot. The report identifies residents on Dartmouth Road, North Street, Stone Terrace, Wardor as stakeholders. Affected Main Street and Holiday Lane residents, such as myself, aren't even acknowledged as stakeholders. It was at this very moment in reading that report that my fears about the slippery slopes of rezoning were crystallized. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much. And our next speaker is Robert Chen, I believe.
We do
Krista Chen.
We do have a Krista Chen listed, and I'm just curious if perhaps she's on the same line as Robert Chen, because we don't have a Krista
no,
in the meeting.
Right.
So,
Well, me and Krista are husband and wife. I know.
okay.
Okay, so are you both going to speak or just one of you?
Well, I've registered all three of us, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can each speak.
That would be great. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I would like to speak first to the question that you asked us in the survey, which was, do we support the new development and the rezoning? The answer is absolutely not. I'll address the issue of traffic. The HRM is well aware of the traffic issues that we have in Bedford currently as they exist by evidence of the two traffic monitors we have coming from the Magazine Hill down on to the approach of Dartmouth Road on one side and going up Dartmouth Road. On each day, we find the traffic is heavy, and by noting the traffic monitors, you'll see the speeds are high. Further to that, HRM has put in our neighborhoods speed bumps to again calm the traffic that passes through our neighborhood to avoid the bottleneck, which is in Bedford at the bottom of Dartmouth Road and the Bedford Highway. And now, recently, last summer, we have had a calming entrance built at the bottom of Eaglewood Drive as it butts onto the small road of Golf Links, which in the winter becomes something more of a laneway than it is a road. There's a newly placed stop sign there also to calm the traffic going through. So over the number of years that we've lived here, which is in excess of 20, we have seen the traffic increase, and we are dealing with this, but not without many considerations owing to the fact that you have to gauge the time of your leaving your property and coming into our property just because of the volume of traffic. The HRM is also aware as a whole of the traffic that passes through that one particular area, given the fact that it's on the broadcasts and the traffic reports, and you have to accommodate your traffic commute to accommodate this. We do not have sidewalks on all of our streets. We do not have adequate water conduits to manage any further infrastructure which would increase the volume of people in our neighborhood, and certainly not on Wardor. Wardor is a very small street in historic Bedford, not adequately equipped for either of those buildings to go up. The streets were not designed for this volume, and they can't accommodate it. The covenants and tenets which were put in place by the previous planners are more than adequate and should not be revised. If you wish to put up such a density of buildings, I'm not opposed to mixed density, but perhaps you might consider Bedford Common. That's not developed, it doesn't have our beautiful trees, and it's certainly more than adequate to accommodate these buildings. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Benjamin Chen. I'm a fourth year Dalhousie student who's been commuting to and from school ever since ever since the 11th grade. This experience commuting through Bedford has me opposed to the addition of the proposed developments. In high school, commuting to Charles P. Allen through Bedford always took a very long time, and similarly, the commute to Dalhousie, the past 3 or 4 years, have also taken an equally, if not greater time. In fact, simply turning out of the subdivisions, it takes an excess of 15 minutes at times. So it's ridiculous to propose a development that would increase the amount of traffic that's already on the roads as they are during rush hour. As I believe other speakers have said, this would add an excess of 100 cars per development. I also shared the concerns of the other speakers with regards to the damages to the neighborhood character and the neighborhood being ill-equipped for such an influx of residents. Other speakers have already covered these points in detail. However, I wish to reiterate that the suggested developments would dwarf the surrounding houses, so it would completely ruin the character, and the neighborhoods are ill-equipped for such an influx of pedestrians, bikes, and vehicles, with the subdivision roads being so narrow as they are. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And Mr. Chen?
Hi, my name is Robert Chen, and we live on 17 Armoyan Court in Eaglewood, and we've lived in this community now for close to 25 years. And I grew up in Halifax, so I've been here for over 50 years, and I've lived in various parts of this city. I grew up in the South End, and this is relevant because when I go back now to visit the South End, I see the tragedy of what's happened to where I grew up, where it's becoming more and more urbanized and higher density of buildings are being put in there. Sure, it's beneficial to people who, quotes, want to live in the South End. But what I would argue is, for example, Bedford, the reason people want to come to live here is because of its historic nature, because of its character, because of the trees, because of the environment that's been created based on the current bylaws and zoning that have been legislated by previous councils. And to now say, well, those don't matter and there can be no creep is ridiculous, because the very fact that we are sitting here having this conversation argues against that. The very fact that we are sitting here discussing rezoning this area, quotes, a study area, says that this is creep. And then the reason you're seeing that the boundaries are drawn through people's backyards is a definition of creep, because they have not even paid attention to where people live. They are more interested in getting the properties built by the developer. In fact, it disturbs me that Mr. Gillis's options, only number 3 was the option to do nothing. In fact, that's very telling. That says that there is already a bias amongst the planners and perhaps the council that we should move on to expand into Bedford and be done with the old municipal planning for Bedford. I think that's very sad. The very fact that we are having this conversation, the very fact that we want to expand on the population in Bedford is because people want to live here. But why do they want to live here? They want to live here because of the character of this neighborhood, because it's a single unit residential area that is hard to find anywhere in HRM now. And to think that we would go down the road of destroying one of the most beautiful areas of the city is tragic. And I would argue that we should really think long and hard about doing something to this neighborhood. And I strongly oppose it.
Thank you very much. We appreciate this. Our next speaker.
Yes, Madam Chair. Our next group of 3 speakers is Patty Scott, Aaron Everett, and Jay Calhoun.
Okay, we can start with Patty Scott. Hello, Patty.
Hello, Madam Chairman.
Yes, thank you very much. And would you like to begin now? You have 4 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Patty Scott, and I live at 33 Wardor Street. I'm speaking on behalf of my sister and myself, as we are co-owners of our property, which is directly opposite to one of the proposed buildings, and we both agree on the points raised herein. I am vehemently against the proposed zoning bylaw changes and the developments on the Dartmouth Road and Wardor Street, along with the vast majority of respondents heard from at today's and yesterday's meeting. Our community is a well-established area consisting of single-family homes. This was what first attracted us to the area more than 20 years ago when looking for our long-term permanent home. We liked the village feel of the area, the peacefulness and safety, the single-family residential zoning, as well as the convenience to shopping, the library, and easy access to major highways and the airport. This is considered a safe and friendly community for young and old alike. Any changes to the zoning to allow low, mid, or high-rise multi-unit buildings, office and or commercial space would be greatly detrimental to the current ambiance and enjoyment of the area. Home buyers are attracted to our community because of the single-family homes on decent-sized individual lots and have pride of ownership and maintenance once they move in. Apartment dwellers having no real investment in ownership are less likely to maintain any more than their immediate apartment. Multi-residential buildings can lead to unsightly or messy sites, which in turn can attract unwanted vermin and pests to the area. The already overburdened infrastructure will certainly be negatively impacted, including increased use of roadways, water and electrical consumption and sewers, as well as services such as waste removal and snow removal, and will negatively affect the existing community. The burden of future repairs and services should not be borne by the existing community in the form of higher property or other taxes, while potentially diminishing property values. Considering the already abundant development of mixed-use commercial and residential buildings that have been built and that are currently being built along the Bedford Highway, and the many for lease signs on local commercial properties, it doesn't make much sense to increase any more such vacancies. New infrastructure and building developments should be located in more fitting areas, i.e. Bedford West and Larry Utech Boulevard, thus leaving the established community of the Fort Sackville area with the status quo. For the quiet enjoyment, ambiance, mature trees, wildlife, walkability, and relative cycling safety are all things our community holds dear. The addition of approximately 200 plus people to this neighborhood would very much endanger these attractions. Allowing this zoning change would set a precedent for future developers and would create permanent, hugely out of proportion eyesores in an otherwise pleasant and comfortably laid out community. The driveway and parking for the Wardor Street building is shown on the plans to be directly opposite my house and driveway. If this isn't contrary to a bylaw, it certainly should be. It is a dangerous situation to have driveways facing each other, and that is unacceptable to us. We also want the large, mature, evergreen, and various other trees and shrubs, which are now growing along the length of Wardor Street at the proposed site, to be preserved as is. These trees and greenery provide some privacy and are a major wind and snow break during our maritime storms. In closing, these developments would be of no benefit to our community and only be of benefit to the developers. I ask the Advisory Council to consider the wishes of the citizens and the detrimental effects these developments would have on our community. Do not recommend approval of the zoning bylaw changes and do not recommend approval of the proposed developments. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. And our next speaker is Hrm Everett.
Hello, how are you?
Hello, you have 4 minutes, Mr. Everett. You can begin now.
My name's Hrm Everett. I live at...
Your voice is too soft. We can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. My name's Hrm Everett. I live at 23 Wardor Street. Currently, I'm fully opposed to the proposal. Traffic being a major concern for mine. My wife and I moved here 8 years ago for the character of the neighborhood. Larger, mature lots with trees, privacy. frankly, if we wanted to live in an area like Larry Utech, we would have bought a house in Larry Utech. I think, you know, the diversity of Bedford and the variation of the neighborhoods is one of its strengths. Trying to make every neighborhood the same, I think, is a complete mistake, and it takes choice away from people. People that want to live in West Bedford can live in West Bedford, and people that want to live in Old Bedford can choose to live in Old Bedford. You know, kind of the gentrification of the area and pushing out everyone existing and their current situation, I don't think benefits anyone. But if it is to happen, I have major concerns with the traffic. First and foremost, I have 2 young children that walk by the area in question every day to school, and many of their friends walk the other way, coming to the Fort Sackville School every day. During the construction period, there will be huge trucks, cranes, concrete trucks, everything else coming down the street, turning into the lots. What is HRM's plan to deal with the safety of children? There's only one small sidewalk that ends at Brook Street. You know, what's the plan to handle traffic, construction traffic, noise, you know, and how it affects the whole neighborhood? These projects will go on for years, and I have not yet heard in any public meeting or forum, you know, any mitigation for any of these, or how it impacts the neighbors or you know, the community as a whole. Everyone's talking about traffic in the future, but my major concern would be traffic during construction. 18-wheelers full of steel, glass, concrete coming in daily. You know, 18-wheelers on Wardor Street that doesn't have a sidewalk and children everywhere just seems like a disaster to me. If HRM could address that and how they plan to keep the community safe, and their plan, if the proposal goes ahead, would be greatly appreciated. You know, I have such great concerns about what's going to happen to the quality of our neighborhood, not only if the buildings are built, but during the construction, that I have a hard time expressing it. You know, we already have a great amount of cut-through traffic, people moving too fast down Wardor Street. All the adjacent streets, including Shore Drive, have got speed bumps now, but not Wardor. And there's no sidewalk past Brook Street on Wardor. And there's so much foot traffic, which is wonderful. People using the community as, you know, almost as a park, an expanded park. And my fear is that will all go away and we'll lose the character of the neighborhood in the future. I guess, you know, I echo all my neighbor and friends, their comments, and I have great concerns going forward with this. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker.
Yes, Madam Chair. The next speaker is Jay Chalfoun.
Yes, I see him. Okay, Mr. Chalfoun, can you please unmute your phone? Press *6.
Good evening.
There you are. Yes, you have 4 minutes and you can begin now. Thank you.
Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to speak about this project. I live in Eaglewood. For this project, the bad thing is the traffic. On Eaglewood and Dartmouth Road now, you can wait almost, you know, more than 5 minutes to skip on it. In the past, we asked for a light over there to make it easier. I'm not sure if this project go through. That would be something to consider to help us out. The other thing too, for the traffic, I believe, and many of my family members believe too, that when Sackville connector will be done, that will relieve a lot of traffic from this area. So most of the traffic, I believe, that in this area, it's not just from Bedford people. It's from the other people that are coming from here to go to Sackville and other areas. So when Sackville connector will be done, that will be relieve a lot of traffic from this area. The other thing too is we have families, we have kids, we have in-laws, we have parents. They cannot move to the areas. There's not places. If something come up for rent, everything is gone quickly. I believe having a more housing and new buildings, that will help people to have their families move closer. We live in Bedford, we like it, but it would be nice to welcome more addition to families or other people who like to move to the areas. And I believe 4-story building, if you build now a small home and you have a tilted land, you already are at 3 stories. I personally, and with all my families, we support this project if the Saxon connector will be already finished by the building is done, so it relieves that traffic. And we encourage to have more of these buildings to help more people coming to the area and help us out with families to come and move from overseas or other places closer to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the last speaker I have on my list is John Boudreau. Is that
Yes,
correct?
yes, Madam Chair. Unfortunately, he was having difficulties phoning in, and he's decided to withdraw his name.
Okay.
I will try to touch base with him to see if he wants to try again on Monday.
Okay.
And we are at the end of our speakers for this evening.
That's great. And I then will say thank you to all of the people who did speak. And Sean, would you like to answer as many of the questions as you can?
Sure, Madam Chair. If you could just give me a couple seconds to think about how I want to approach this. I've written down, I'm guessing 36 questions to answer, some of which are very specific, and I'll try to get to all of those. What I will say to start, I will likely miss some, or I likely will not answer them to your satisfaction or in enough detail. So you have my contact information. Get a hold of me over the next couple of days, and we can chat through as much as you want. And I'm going to start by trying to paraphrase a lot of what I've heard over the last couple of months. And a couple of nights ago, oh my God, it feels like a while. Last night, someone said that I didn't do a very good job summarizing the survey. And I will agree with that. I did not. We received over hundreds and hundreds of pages. And what we did here, and I've read these, Miles have read these, I know that Councillor Outich read many of them. And we heard a lot of fear, and we heard a lot of anger, disbelief, and people saying that they're being betrayed. And I do want to acknowledge that that's what people have been telling us again tonight and yesterday. And this is my job, and I do generally enjoy it, but these meetings aren't easy because this is your neighborhood. And this is really important to you. I didn't know much about this neighborhood until I started this project. People have pointed out some shortcomings in the report. And I started going out, meeting some people, talking to them on the phone. This is a very nice place. And I'm in this profession because I believe in nice places. And I want this city and your neighborhood to be great. We have some different goals. I'm going to be honest about that, and we'll get into that with these questions. And you're not going to agree with a ton of stuff I say, and that's okay. But I really appreciate people coming out and being respectful when they're angry, being respectful when they disagree. And for those of you who have put the time into getting into the municipal plan and the regional plan, well done. Those are not easy documents to use. So with that being said, I'm going to step back a little bit to the general context of where HRM planning is, because there was a huge amount of questions. I'll try to get to them. So what are we trying to accomplish here? How I view my role as staff is trying to balance a huge amount of competing priorities. One of which is how to keep your neighborhood great. And we've talked about that a lot tonight, and we'll get back to it. And the second, which I went through in the presentation, is how do we take high-level, conceptual, not super detailed regional plan ideas? And this is the policy that council has told planning staff to work with. This is the policy that I have to work with alongside your municipal plan. So how do I take that and apply this to Bedford? And the honest, straight up truth is right now, we don't know how to do that. That is part of what this process is about. So that's where we are with some of it. We'll get back to the details on the regional plan because there were some very, very detailed questions. So the big picture context that HRM planning, council, and many people are struggling with right now, and it's hitting home in your community, is that for the first time in my lifetime, for the first time in your lifetime, people are moving to this city, into this area for a variety of reasons from a variety of places in numbers that we've never seen. And so right now we're seeing demand for housing everywhere. We're seeing it on the peninsula. If you come into town, there's cranes all over the place. We're seeing it at Clayton Park. We're seeing it in Bedford, Sackville, Spryfield, you name it. Why don't we put them all in greenfield developments? There's a number of different reasons. Greenfield developments would be new developments. So we open up new areas for development. We put in new pipes. We put in new roads, etc. Your Bedford Wests. We're going to do some of that. And that's a big picture question for the regional plan to answer. The reasons why we only do so much of it is varied. And the regional plan explains some of it if you want to go back into it. But there's a number of different objectives. The first would be to preserve natural areas and habitat around HRM. The second would be to not overextend new services. They're very expensive. They require a lot of maintenance. And the third big reason would be to try to get people changing their transportation habits. If we build our areas differently, we can hopefully get more people walking, cycling, taking the bus. So that's the high level perspective. So some of what HRM Council is telling us to do is put more people into existing areas. And how we do that is difficult, as you've pointed out. This is not an easy decision for council. So we take it very seriously. And so that's the high level kind of where we are. I'll go through the individual questions. I just want to talk a little more about policy approach. And it is more of an art than a science. I will say that. When you read through policies, even within a single policy set, and if you excuse me for a second, I'll try to find my notes because I've been scribbling like crazy. And this is only an example. This is one small policy within the Bedford MPS. So at a high level, it says that we are to permit residential development to occur in areas where the municipality can economically provide services. So areas that already have pipes in the ground would fit that. Okay, so looking good for something here. Provide for a choice of housing types. This policy doesn't specify how much of each housing. It doesn't specify exactly what type, but it says we have a choice, which strongly suggests that in certain areas of Bedford, at the least, there should be something more than single units. But then we get the tension. Preserve the character of existing neighborhoods in their present form. That's a tension right up within one policy. Permit the full range of residential uses again. More tension. Promote neighborhood stability within established residential areas. We're back to stability. And this is where policy is trying to put all of the different pieces together and make a reasonable, informed decision. And that's very tough for council, and we're going to try to do that. So with that in mind, Madam Chair, I believe we still have some time. I'm going to go to try through the original questions, and hopefully that provides where we are and what we're trying to do. So I'll get into the details. Again, if people want to chat further, we can do that. The final thought, this stuff is difficult. I do apologize as it feels like stuff dribbles and drabs out. One of the curses of professionals, if you will, is that we quote unquote know what we're doing and we forget what other people don't. And so I do apologize for that. We try to get this information out to you. And so reach out, we'll chat, and there is more information kind of coming onto the webpage. And this meeting is another chance to do it. So. Okay. School capacity. What we do with these approaches is that we talk continually with the Halifax Regional Center for Education. They often email about larger projects in particular, trying to find out where we see people going. And they are constantly working to try to put they have to legally put every child into a classroom. And so it is a huge challenge all across Sackville, Bedford, mainland Halifax, and Halifax Peninsula, HRM broadly. But we do work with Halifax Regional Center for Education, and they will house every child in a classroom. Driveway location. So going back to the idea that these are concepts presented by a developer, the thing that I will say is that there are a great deal of bylaws, the most important one being the streets bylaw, that also regulates development in HRM. So the details of driveways, where they can go, how far they can be from intersections, and sight lines, and that is regulated by our engineering department at the permit stage. So they will have to meet those bylaws, and those do not get varied. I know people are talking about slippery slope. Those bylaws, there's no slippery slope. They don't vary. So often we leave driveway locations conceptual unless we see a giant red flag that engineering flags super early. Sidewalks, it's difficult to tie new infrastructure directly to new buildings. And there's a whole host of institutional and legal reasons for that. I'll leave it at that. I guess the honest answer would be there is no plan for us to extend sidewalks or put new sidewalks in this area at this time. Wind tunnel, I think with a 4-story building, that doesn't suggest a huge problem. We generally don't look for wind studies until high rise, which is 10 to 12 stories. And where these two buildings, if something gets built, considering that's what we're doing, the proposals are close, but not wind tunnel close. Sunshine, we're going to put on our list of things to do a shadow analysis for some different building forms, because that really does help people. So we will do shadow analysis, and we will make sure that that is done before this comes back to Planning Advisory Committee, and we will get those onto the website. Shadow analysis is much easier than wind. We know where the sun shines, and we know the angles, so that's easy. Traffic lights added. So the way that traffic and streets is regulated in HRM is through a different process than the planning process. And this was a specific question, so we're going to talk about it. And so the traffic devices like signs, crosswalks, etc., are under the purview of the traffic authority, which is our engineering department. So council cannot tell them to put a traffic light here. What council could do is request what's called a traffic warrant, and the traffic authority would look at the volumes on all the streets, and they would choose whether or not a traffic signal is warranted, hence traffic warrant. Water and sewer, generally, yes, we have capacity in this area, and more specifically, Halifax Water won't issue a permit if there's not. So if we made a big mistake anywhere in the municipality and rezoned something, and then later on someone came in to develop and there was not capacity, they don't get a permit. And we'll leave it at that. I don't want to talk about what might happen to me if I make that mistake, because that would be very bad for me. Wildlife. Trees in the area, yep, they could be cut down. They could be cut down for a variety of different buildings. Where they'd go, I'm not sure. I don't have that information, sorry. I'm gonna skip traffic for a little bit because that is a very big topic. We'll go back to it. The regional plan. We had questions about where is, I guess, the legal boundary of the boundary of the Sunnyside Growth Center. So the Sunnyside Growth Center is, all of the growth centers are found on map 1. Let me just check that, make sure I've got that right. They're found on a map in the regional plan, and I'll bring it up and I'll make sure I give you the correct citation right here, because there are a lot of them. So that is map 1, settlement and transportation. And I can't share my screen, unfortunately. I've had a huge amount of technical difficulties through the evening that thankfully went behind the scenes, but it is not completely defined where any growth center starts or ends. It is for council as they apply the regional plan to decide what is and is not within a growth center. The current regional plan is being reviewed, and one of the outcomes will be to actually define those growth centers. And the density that should be applied within those growth centers beyond a reference to low, medium, and high density mixes is not defined in the regional plan. And so one of the regional plan policies that speaks to this area is that in established residential areas, council shall consider low and medium density developments, suggesting very strongly that in established areas, high density generally out. And 48 units on 0.5 acres, I would say that's on the high end of medium. 4 stories, it's generally, we're not going to call that high density. That would be medium density. Some of the specific policies, I'll try to talk to them. I was losing sound. Policy R18, R8, R19A, R16, and R11B of the Bedford bylaw. So policy R8 is important for a number of reasons. And it's the one that says a plan amendment shall be required in order for town council to consider rezoning or development agreement applications which would seek to increase the number of dwelling units or alter the land uses. So that's where we are saying that this is what's happening. They would like to ask for more. The specific reference to a specific development agreement you can have in this policy is for including a single apartment unit within a single unit dwelling in the RSU zone. So a little bit different. And then R18 and 19 follow out of that, where you have encouraged the construction of seniors housing and other things. This one's tough. There's a lot to get into there for sure. I would again say that this is one of the areas where policy becomes a question of balancing different priorities. And furthermore, the exercise we're going through is looking to change the policy for these areas. So we could come up with new policy that applies to some, none, well, not none, that'd be pointless, but some lots within the study area. And that policy can be different from existing policy. Council does have the ability to change their policy, and they can do that at their discretion. And the tests, I won't get into the test of whether that's reasonable or not. That's neither here nor there. 35 units per acre for CDD applies if you're going to do a CDD zone, which are generally large integrated developments. And so 35 units per acre across a whole CDD zone would be fairly high density if you look at the whole area. Also, they're not asking for a CDD, they're asking for new policy. So that's very critical. We're not trying to push aside all of the existing goals, but we have to read them as a whole. And we also have to say, in this case, council has said potentially look at different tools and approaches. People don't want to hear that. They don't like it, that's okay. But council has told us to look at new approaches, consider new policy. The legal order of precedence for a plan. Miles, if you're there, if you want to weigh in on this one, this is Miles' wheelhouse. What I would say in this case is that the MPS is what we look to when we're developing detailed regulations and detailed policy for the land use bylaw. The regional plan gives high-level direction. So it directs what we try to do if we consider changing the MPS. And so The MPS is, I guess, it would be fair to say that that is the stronger of the two documents. However, going back to the point a second ago, council can look to change the MPS as circumstances change. And how they balance the two is, again, some of that discretion, some of that art, some of the value judgments they have to make. The MPS should not be in conflict with the regional plan. You shouldn't be making decisions to change or to review or not change the MPS that are in conflict with the regional plan. So that's really important. Miles, you're there. If you have anything to add, feel free to jump in. Don't want to put him on the spot, but he's good at this stuff. The Sackville floodplain and the growth area does change things a fair bit. So we do not know right now how much development is appropriate. Council has directed staff to review the policy in light of new findings on the floodplain. I will say that the floodplain does not go past the rail line. It slopes up. So none of the flood mapping suggests that that would be a concern. And this is one of the big questions for Sunnyside, is what is the future given the floodplain? And so that is an unknown in this process that we will discuss with the Planning Advisory Committee. Stormwater runoff. We do have a new stormwater bylaw, which contains new standards for drainage. And again, that's an engineering policy that the developers, whatever ends up happening on this site, whatever council decides to do with this site, any developer in HRM has to meet those new standards. And similar to the streets bylaw I mentioned, that is not negotiable. And I'm just going to see what I've got here. Madam Chair, unless I obviously missed something that you noted, I hope that is a reasonably comprehensive list. And any suggestions on follow-up, I can certainly speak more to. You're muted, Madam Chair.
Yep, no. I think you addressed pretty much all of the questions. The only thing that's I wonder about is, well, there were comments on neighborhood compatibility. Not so much a question, I guess. Traffic and compatibility seem to be the number one and number two. So
Traffic.
Yeah.
Do we want to run through some of the numbers from the traffic impact statement, or would you feel that that's appropriate at this time?
I think people would be interested in hearing what you have so far.
That's what I was missing. So I'm glad I went back. So I think there were some questions about the study area. And since I was the person working with the study area, I think that's fair. I mentioned that too. So if I try to remind me of that as well, why it is where it is. Okay, so the way our traffic impact studies work is they are done by professional engineers who submit them for our engineering department to validate and look at. So I'm not a professional engineer, but I'll pull some of the numbers for people to hear. And again, these are on the website. They're under the application portion. So sometimes they're in the letter, sometimes they're in a separate document. If you can't find them, let me know and I can get them to you or walk you through them. So the way it works is they try to estimate the trip generation, which is a fancy way for saying how many cars are coming out of the driveway. And so for the proposal at the Wardor Street, adjacent to the existing Wardor Center on that property, they're suggesting that in the AM peak hours, it will generate approximately 25 vehicle trips, 10 entering and 15 exiting, and 37 vehicle trips, 19 entering and 18 exiting during the PM peak hour. And to give a sense of the volumes that are on Wardor Street and Dartmouth Road right now. So as of 2014, this is the counts they were using. This one's a little bit older. I think the other one has newer data. The peak hour two-way volumes, so each direction of the road, on Dartmouth Road at that intersection is 1,465 vehicles per hour and 1,735 vehicles per hour in the PM peak. So the busiest hour, 1,400 or so and 1,700 or so vehicles in both directions. And so the conclusion that the professional engineer, and this is their words, since the number of site-generated trips is low and trips will be distributed to 4 site driveways, it is not expected to have any significant impacts to the level of performance of Dartmouth Road, Wardor Street, or the regional street system. So that is one of the traffic impact statements, some of the numbers, and the conclusion from the professional engineer. And I will point out that this is a projection. So this is a projection. And a newer one for the other site from 2019. Just looking through here. The trip generation estimate is 13 two-way vehicle trips during the AM peak and 16 two-way vehicle trips during the PM peak hour. And the similar conclusion is that since the estimated number of site-generated vehicle trips are low, the proposed development is not expected to have any significant impact to traffic performance on the adjacent intersections, streets, or the regional road network. So that is the projection and the conclusion as provided by the engineering that we've given. And that is reviewed by our engineering team. And should they find any deficiencies or anything that they don't agree with, they usually send them back for an addendum and we look at it again. So that's the current status of the traffic counts that we have right now.
Okay, and you said that you would do and I'm going to ask you to be very quick with it. Tell us why the area has been designated.
Yeah, so the study area approach, we as in planning staff, we got 2 applications kind of relatively short order. As you can see, they're very similar in size and the issues are similar. And we didn't want to deal with them one-on-one because that's double these meetings. That also doesn't let us look at them together. And we also looked, and yes, we saw the Masonic Lodge and we look at the building next to it. And from a regional planning perspective, from a perspective of looking for places for housing, yes, that looks like a place where we could put something. So yes, I put that in there. I suggested council look at that. Then we broadly just kind of filled out along Wardor Street up to Parker's Brook and then across the street. I'm thinking back a year and a half now. I think we just squared off the back. The goal is not to creep it along. And as we listen to this, I mean, are we going to propose that every single one of those RSU lots that people are screaming, I own it and I don't want to do anything? Am I going to propose changes to that after hearing this? You know, I don't want to tip all my cards, but does that sound like fun for me? No, it's not something that we're strongly looking at right now. I will say one final thing, that one reason we did the study area is that creep is on our minds too. The idea that if you do these all one by one, then it's just easier to say that, oh, well, you got one down the street. If you look at it at a study area and council says, whenever we get to the end, that in June 22nd, 2022, whatever date we finish this thing, if council says, we looked at a study area, we have chosen these rules, nothing else is changing outside of that, to me, that is a stronger statement than looking at every site one-on-one, because when do you stop looking at them? When do you make a definitive statement that this is where we might change and this is where we will not? And so it is a double-edged sword. We're looking at more properties than those applicants asked for, but should council choose to make any changes or not, then at least they can come back and say, we looked at it more than one property at a time, and we made these decisions. This is, for now, the decision. And the only other thing I will say is that the long-term decision-making is council's, and those pressures become a political question, as people are obviously knowing. And the long-term question of creep is something that council has to deal with in many, many neighborhoods. And it comes down to what council chooses to tell planning staff and how they choose to write their policy and how they operationalize that. So hope that wasn't too long. And I think I got stuff for you there.
Thanks very much.
And it's Tim. There's two questions that I...
not tonight. Can you just hold them for our next meeting, please?
Well, okay, all right.
Okay, we're going to wrap up now, and I want to thank everyone who in the community who registered to provide your feedback on case number 22267, Dartmouth Road and Wardor Street, Bedford. It's important that members of the community are informed and provide feedback about proposed developments in their area. The Northwest PAC and HRM planning staff values this feedback from members of the community. If at the conclusion of the public information meeting, you wish to provide further feedback or have additional questions, please contact the planner, Sean Gillis. You have until June 30th, 2021 to submit feedback on case number 22267, Dartmouth Road and Wardor Street in Bedford. Again, thank you for joining us this evening, and good night. And I want to thank the committee for